Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches. Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host for today, Joe Sellepack, the Executive Director at the Council of Churches. Christ is risen. Today is Easter Sunday, and every year I'm amazed at the different lectionary readings that accompany this time of the season. Mark's Gospel always ends up with a little bit of foreboding because Jesus is on the loose and everyone's afraid. In other Gospels, there are women who are announcing the resurrection of Jesus. In others, there's a race between Peter and John to see who can be the first one to announce the resurrection. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Easter and what it means and what different traditions associate with the resurrection of Jesus. And to help me do that is the Reverend Dr. Dave Drebert. Hi,
hello.
Dave. Welcome to Encounter.
Glad to be here.
And also the Reverend Douglas Taylor, and we won't be as formal as this. The Reverend Dr. Dr. Dave Drebert. Reverend
Dave works just fine.
All right,
you can call me Doug.
And we'll call you Douglas.
That's fine.
Douglas Taylor from the Unitarian or Universalist Church. Welcome to Encounter, and Christ is risen.
Hallelujah.
Christ is risen. So. Let's talk a little bit about resurrection and the way that your traditions have tended to approach Easter in particular. So you want to start, Dave?
Sure. Well, resurrection for us is a reality. It's something that actually happened many years ago. But resurrection is also something that keeps happening. It's not something that we just happened once with Jesus. In fact, I like to think of resurrection as a law of nature, that well, we're in the middle of spring now, and so we have a resurrection of the flowers and the plants and the animals coming out of migration and whatnot. That's a kind of resurrection. But there's also resurrection in our own lives that happens all the time. When something dies, perhaps it's a marriage, perhaps it's a job, perhaps it's almost anything. The example of Jesus and his resurrection gives us the hope that life can continue, that there are new things that can happen, and new life can begin again. So that's kind of our sense of resurrection, from the historical event to the fact that it happens every day.
And the creeds that you use in worship kind of reinforce that, don't they? Yes, yeah.
We talk about bodily resurrection, especially after death. Now, what that body looks like, we have no idea. And in fact, Paul talks about being sown a physical body and being raised a spiritual body. But it's still a body. And what that looks like, I have no idea. But we have faith that it will be something wonderful and awesome.
And Unitarian and Universalists are kind of an interesting mix.
Yeah, we come in on a very different angle than my colleague Dave here. We certainly have that sense of talking about the connection point for folks around resurrection as a reality that happens in people's lives, but the history of it for us is a different conversation, and even the word resurrection gets some people a little nervous. Unitarian Universalism grew up out of Christianity, but today it's strictly speaking not a Christian community. There are Christians among us. There are also folks who grew up Jewish or do a Buddhist practice or are pagan or atheist. And so we have a very different group of people who have gathered together. And so when we approach Easter, we've got our own Unitarian Universalist history, but we also honor the histories of the individuals who are in the room. So it becomes a very different experience. Historically, the Unitarians kind of parted ways with some of the traditional sense of Christianity when they said that God is one and not a Trinity. And so the sense of Jesus as God had an interesting impact on what the resurrection was. And the Universalists came in with their sense that everybody is going to heaven, there is no hell, and salvation is God's guarantee to every person. And so the effect of the resurrection and the death on the cross is also then brought into question, and implications come out like that. But while that is a big disconnect with the story that Dave talks about and how it's presented in a lot of the Christian churches around us, the implication that comes out with what are the ways in which life has again and again a story of resurrection, the ways in which hope doesn't look like it's going to win and yet it does, how love has the power to conquer death in this deeply mythical sense. That's something that we do talk about on Easter, and Easter is that time when we gather together and we talk about life and the power of life.
And after a polar vortex, and after a really rough winter, it would seem like our ancestors knew a little bit about what it means to live in a bleak winter, and to emerge from it a little bit shaken. I think most of us can say that this has been a pretty tough winter as far as those things are concerned. And when you start looking at the birth of spring around us, it kind of gives us a picture of what resurrection might look like. Now, how would that? So you have a congregant who's lost a husband or lost a spouse, lost a wife, or a partner. In what way do you think resurrection happens for that person? Like, how does that speak to them?
Well, I think that when there's a death, particularly the death of a loved one, you have that. I mean, it's a deeply visceral experience that I can't personally attest to, thankfully, but I can say there are powerful stories out there that witness to how this experience that you have of loss is not the end, is not the complete story. And in fact, the reason this hurts, the reason this loss is so poignant is because there is love, and that love will win. It doesn't feel, you don't feel it yet. You know, you're still in winter, you're still in Good Friday, but it is the nature of things. It is the nature of the human heart to resurrect. It will come. Love will win.
Well, let me rephrase it then. I mean, for David and for the Episcopal Church, resurrection is a real reality. It's not just something that is a part of. You know, it's not just the love wins, but ultimately life wins out over death.
Yes. There is eternal life.
Yeah, and what,
although not necessarily eternal life starting at death,
right?
Yeah, we also would say that eternal life starts now.
It starts now, and that would kind of reinforce Douglas's point about love winning in spite of, you know, but it's incorporated into because Christ is risen. There is no death. Death is just a temporary thing.
Yeah, we have a real example of this happening, and we can follow along where Jesus went. You know, it also, resurrection is very important in the Episcopal Church. The incarnation is also as important, maybe even a little bit more. And you know, the idea that that divinity has rested in a human being is also kind of an example, because we as human beings also contain a spark of the divine in us. And there is this calling of divine to divine. It gets a little bit mystical here, but we have God calling to us and our spirits responding to God. And that is part of what we're talking about with resurrection, I think, where our spirits are being called back to in the presence of the divinity, of the divine, of God.
You know what's interesting, though, is that Unitarians would probably resonate with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the psalm where we deep calls to deep, as the deer longing for water. I mean, that sure.
So it's kind of interesting to me that once you get beyond some of the creedal assumptions, all right, so even once you get outside of your head, so to speak, the idea is on the mystical level, things tend to converge a little bit.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the differences between us are real and valid and are part of what makes it interesting to be in conversation. But the conclusions and some of the interpretations, some of the implications are so exciting, partly because there's so much confluence.
Yeah.
A wonderful Buddhist lady told me once that she believes that all religions meet sort of in the center of the ocean in a mystical place. We all have to ride our own wave to get there. And I really like that kind of analogy that, yes, I have to follow my tradition, the way my mind can wrap around some of these things in order to get to that center. But in the end, in that center is where we all meet.
And so let's go back to something that Douglas alluded to when he was opening with the idea that resurrection can be a founding myth or something mythical. Now, oftentimes when we hear the word myth within our culture, it's used pejoratively. It talks about it being a lie, not necessarily something that happened, something that we kind of think about on occasions, but don't really put a lot of credence in it. But I didn't hear that coming from what you said at the beginning. So it was more of a there was more substance to it than that. So let's expand that a little bit. What does it mean to talk about the resurrection as a myth?
Well, of course, we believe that it actually happened. So
Exactly.
It's fact and myth. And again, it's that example, this sense that maybe sign is maybe a better word for me than myth in terms of this, that Jesus' resurrection is a sign to us that will be available to us as well. And so
so it points beyond it. It's an event that points beyond itself to a deeper meaning, which is kind of what a sign does. So if you see a stop sign, it means stop, literally, but behind that is if you don't stop, you're going to get a ticket. Or worse, or an accident, or something else is going to happen. So it is a sign, but behind the sign, there's a huge story that's behind it. Now, in a way, myth does that for us too, doesn't it?
Well, and myths have. I mean, if we are open to that, the myth can tell us information about who we are, and they're identity-making experiences. That this is not just a story. This is not just some history. This is actually happening to me and to people around us in our communities. That is deeper than. And so for a Unitarian Universalist, we talk about it's not a literal fact. For most of the people in my congregation, they don't see it as a literal fact, but they appreciate the depth of truth that is contained in the message and in the myth and in